All right, so let's start another PSC post-fieldwork seminar. We have Bayu Diaz today. Most of you, of course, will know him. Lecturer at UGM in Yogyakarta, but in his main capacity now, a PhD student here at the department. Some of you will have attended his pre-fieldwork seminar, which used the same starting slide, but hopefully, of course, the rest of the presentation will differ, so he will show us what he's found in the field. So without further ado, Bayu on the role of the aristocrats in post-authoritarian Indonesia.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Thank you everybody for coming to my presentation. This is the sultans in their formal clothes, except this one, which is using the what we call batu bacan, quite famous a few weeks ago. So basically I would like to present about, first of all, about what is my puzzle. So why I'm doing this one. Of course, I already mentioned it before, but I just want to remind you about this one. And then go to the research question, methodology. I will focus on my main argument and theoretical review. I would also want to clarify about the difference between coastal and inland aristocracy, which is very important in separating the aristocracy in Indonesia. And then I will go to 5 case studies that I choose. And I will end up with conclusion and then the chapter. First of all, this is my puzzle. Why have some aristocrat in this table succeed and then failure? So in the green one, we can see that there are variation, a high degree of variation between winning and losing in the election. I also want to find what is their economic success. Actually, this is I already present in my proposal. So to answer this kind of high degree of variation between win or lose, my main question at that time was why have some Indonesian aristocrats succeed in gaining political and economic success after the 1998 regime change, while others have failed. So I still keep my main question, so I didn't change it, and I still want to find out why they are success in some areas and fail in the other. So my research journey started September last year. I went first of all to Bima in Nusa Tenggara. At that time, on September, there National Kraton Festival, which is I met almost around 70 sultans and rajas in Indonesia. And after attending the festival, I went to go to my first case study at Goa in South Sulawesi. And then I go further to the east, to the North Maluku, which is the easternmost aristocracies in Indonesia. In these areas, I interviewed because they are very close related, not only Ternate, but also Tidore, Bacan, and Jailolo. So I interviewed all of them, and then I went to Bali, make research especially in Gianyar district, in Ubud sub-district, but also I went to Denpasar. Of course, we have to go to around Bali, okay? So it's a very nice place to go. And then go to Yogyakarta, and lastly in South Sumatra before, unfortunately, you have to go to Jakarta. Well, during my research, I went to 10 provinces, around 14 other city and district, and I interviewed in total around 228 respondents or informants, varied from political actors, from members, from the Bupati, ex-region mayor, and then I plan to transcribe around 191 interview because some of them are around 30, 40 of them are only have minor relevance to my research. I also managed to interview around 20 sultans and raja, not including this one. This is the fake one. And another high-level aristocrats, around 23, like queens, princess, prince, and another high-level aristocrat. I only got it around 6 interviews because they don't want to be recorded, and I miss key informants around 3 because of, you know, when I went there they are sick, and because some of my informants are old, so I miss them. My anticipated argument at that time was those aristocrats who were successful in their quest for political power in post-war Indonesia are those who benefited from their roles during the revolutionary period of 1945, with this combination between the structuralist and historicist approach. Aristocrats who answered the revolutionary call had become important factor during Sukarno era and especially during the New Order. They accumulated economic power and used it to compete in political position in post-authoritarian era. At that time, it seems to be very strong, but unfortunately, I found the falsification of this anticipated argument. First of all, I went to Goa. The king, at that time, the late king of Goa, fully endorsed the republic in 1950s during the revolution and handed over not only the non-palace sultanate land, which I will explain later, but also the palace handed over to the republic, but there's not yield positive result during post-1998 election. And then I went to my second case study. The Sultan of Ternate at that time was commander of Netherlands in the civil administration, or Konica, which is really opposed the integration, the republic at that time, but his son successfully gained political position in post-1998. So I dropped my hypothesis. However, I found a very much more interesting answer. To find the differentiation between successful and failure that I present in the first graph, I tried to test at least what are the factors that important to their level of success of the aristocrats in politics. I tried to find around 7. I found 7 of the alternative of answer and found that non-palace land control is the most important aspect. So for the rest of this presentation, I would like to focus on the land control. So my main argument is that the political performance of aristocrats is to like extent determined by the extent to which they were able to defend or revitalize their economic resources basis, especially land. Therefore, the level of their success in politics was a reflection of their ability to hold on to their land, or alternatively, create substitute economic resources. Successful aristocrats distribute non-palace land in exchange of people loyalty as an invention of the appanage system, where people working to the palace in return of loyalty. In cases which people depend economically, politically, and socially to the aristocracy for land or other privileges, aristocracies have won in post-1998 election or recorded other form of success. So this is my argument now. It's come because my focus is on the land. My research journeys arrive at what is the role of land in Indonesian politics, and therefore I come to this law, this basic agrarian law number 5, 1960, or in Indonesia we call it Undang-Undang Pokok Agraria. Many authors argue that this is the second most important regulation in Indonesia after the Constitution. So in this basic agrarian law, which is try to abolish the dual system of colonial base and also the traditional aristocracy-based system and integrate them into a single national law, is clearly said that land and water rights of the sultanates of our kingdoms are abolished and transferred to the state. This is on the conversion part in the Article 9. So basically all of the sultanates' land is transferred to the state based on this law. It's also introduced what we call as the landholding, maximum landholding, or land ownership ceiling. So Burhan cannot own more than 20 hectares of non-irrigated land. So basically in Indonesia, you cannot own more than this kind of land. So there is a maximal land holding. And there is another important aspect, that adat communities can maintain their land as long as it's not contradict to the national policy. This is what it says. So basically, the land of the Sultan was transferred, but the lower community of the adat can maintain their land. I come this basic agrarian law because it's very connected to land. I try to categorize within my 5 case studies whether about their relation on land. So I come up with this one. There are 3 what the early historian and the anthropologists of Southeast Asia categorized as coastal aristocracy. So 3 of my case study in Ternate, Goa, and to some extent in Palembang can be defined as coastal aristocracy. In coastal aristocracy, the palace is always facing the sea. So it's just in the offshore. So the palace of facing the sea, there is a port in front of the palace, and trade is the most important aspect of economic support for the kingdom. We can easily find in Ternate or in Goa or in other coastal aristocracy. In contrary to the inland aristocracy, which I found in Yogyakarta and Ubud, in Yogyakarta, for instance, the palace is facing the mountain. So, in inland aristocracy, the most important aspect of economic support of the Sultanate is coming from the production of crops. That's why the irrigation system is very important. The classic work of Wittfogel, for instance, categorized what the Asian despotism as hydraulic society and hydraulic civilization based on their control over irrigation system. So in inland aristocracy, we can see that very easy, and that they have the structures special to maintain the flow of the water. In Ubud, we know the subak system of water, and in Yogyakarta, the categorization of the water management. I would like to read this part, about the existing literatures that I found so far. The literature on land and politics in Indonesia is largely dominated by 4 themes: land, reform, and peasant studies, land law, forestry and environmental management, and land dispute studies. First of all, land reform and peasant studies concentrate on the implication of land reform for economic redistribution, especially as it related to landless farmers. Most of the writers, for instance, Selo Sumarjan, Sajogja, and Utrecht, argue that the land reform were important in providing better livelihood for lower-class citizens. Suharto stopped the land reform program mainly due to the ideological reasons in 1970s. Thus, while there are strong focus on the recipient of redistributed land, not much is said about those actors from whom it was taken. For instance, the aristocrat. Secondly, some writers focus on land law management in Indonesia. Most authors agree that there have been tendencies to reduce the role of basic agrarian law and make it difficult to be operationalized. One of the most important changes was when Suharto introduced the forestry law in 1967 that covered up to 70% of Indonesian area. Thirdly, some scholars concentrate on forestry and environmental management issues that have been popular since decentralization was implemented in 2001. The authority to manage forestry is one of the authorities that has been transferred to the local level. It has created tension between local and national government. One of the most striking examples, for instance, was when the local government of Wonosobo issued bylaws that unilaterally claimed the forest area previously managed by state enterprise to be communally managed by the people, as written by Thornburn in 2004. Lastly, another group of authors highlight land conflict as a result of overlapping land law in Indonesia. Mostly, this conflict involves the state and enterprises on one side and people and other communities on the other. There are no clear regulation and policies related to land management. In short, the authors that dominate the literature of land politics in Indonesia can be divided into state, enterprises, peasants, and Adat communities, but the original owner of much of the land until the 1960s and beyond have disappeared from the secular radar screen. I am hoping that my research would fill the gap related to the role of land in politics of aristocracy, as well as the role of aristocracy in the politics of land. The other streams of literature that has much relevance for the analysis of aristocratic land politics but has increasingly ignored both aristocrat and land is the elite formation in Indonesia. Theories of Indonesian elite formation in Indonesia after 1965 largely ignored the important aspect of land and aristocracies. After Suharto reduced mass politics to a minimum level, and according to most scholars, elites were drawn mostly from certain ethnic groups, the bureaucracy, and the military. Harold Crouch, for instance, in his article Patrimonialism and Military Rules in Indonesia, argues that the formation of New Order elite was recruited from both military, technocrat, and bureaucratic background. Moreover, he wrote, the elite of the New Order was dominated by army officers and the Western educated technocrat who helped them formulate economic policy. Similar to Crouch and Gregory, in her article, Recruitment and Factional Pattern of Indonesian Political Elite, found that elite formation in the New Order was determined by four factors: education and social status, religion, and ethnic origins. And they came from three institutions: military, political party, and the technocracy. Moreover, Donald K. Emerson, in his book Indonesian Elite Political Culture and Cultural Politics, defined membership of Indonesian elite as affiliation with the higher central bureaucracy and the national legislature. In his research, he found that elite culture here was an interplay between ethnicity and religion, institution, and organization. In post-Suharto Indonesia, Takashi Shiraishi, for instance, argued that the majority of local parliamentarians have background in New Order era political parties and youth and mass organization. Even after Suharto was gone, it seems the focus of elite formation studies has been the formal political institution connected to the state, as it had been under Suharto. Fedi Hadis, in his book Localizing Power in Post-Suharto Indonesia, and Amalinda Safirani in her writing about local strongmen in new regional politics in Indonesia in 2004, have raised some important issues that resonate with my study. But again, they do not mention aristocracy and land as the key factor in elite formation. Hadis elaborates the political basis of elite dominance in the context of localization of power, in particular in case study of North Sumatra, East Java, and Yogyakarta. He argues that successful local elites in contemporary Indonesia tends to be those who already have access to substantial material resources, as well as some degree of control over instrument of political intimidation. But again, land is not identified as such resource or instrument, and aristocrats are not mentioned specifically. Overall, unlike the Philippine studies, where much of the studies of elite formation focused on land-owning class, which in turn had their root in local aristocracy under colonial rule, scholarship on the Indonesian elite has neglected the issue of land and aristocracy. My research will show that while the use of land by local aristocracies was not a national instrument of power, it allowed some aristocratic family to carve out their own political space in post-Suharto Indonesia. My presentation today is largely about how they did that. So first of all, I would like to go to my case study. First of all is Yogyakarta, the melting two aristocracies between the Sultanate of Yogyakarta and the Pakualaman Principality. Sultan is automatically become the governor since 2012 based on the law. Its control not only owned the palace land but also non-palace land in much area in Yogyakarta. It is not subject to 1960 basic agrarian law because in 1950s, during the law on the formation of Yogyakarta, it clearly said the agrarian is part of the Yogyakarta autonomy. One of the most important aspects in Yogyakarta that the land control is, for some extent, transcend national law. For instance, if Kolom changed his nationality to Indonesia, he cannot own the land in Yogyakarta. So all of the Chinese descent, Arabic descent, and Caucasian descent, even though they are Indonesian citizens, cannot own the land in Jogja. So it's not only against the other law, but actually it's against the constitution, but no one has talked about it before. In 2012, it's have received the, like I said before, the Politics, Economy, and Culture to Law number 13. This is the copy of the certificate, dated in 1999 in Yogyakarta. In this part, it's clearly said that this is the hak guna bangunan, or the right to use the building. It's clearly said that the building is on the, it is said, tanah sultan ground, or in the top of sultan's land. You cannot find this kind of certificate in any other part of Indonesia. Now they try to take over all of the government land and village land. They also control politics, economy, and culture to land politics. This is the success case in my case study. For instance, one of the losing candidates in Yogyakarta Pilkada said that they are not actually facing the Sultanates. They are not also facing the winning candidate, but facing the Sultanate. That's why he lost. In Yogyakarta also is very important, very interesting, because there is what we call as government permit or izin gubernur. This is not part of the law system in Indonesia. It's different with the government decree. This is izin gubernur. I analyzed 2,400 izin gubernur, reading it one by one for 3 weeks. And then I found that most of the land permit, most of the government permit in Indonesia, 83% of it related to land releasing. Only around 70% which is non-land. This is so Yogyakarta is always led by the Sultan. The first one is HB9, releasing about 90% of land permit. Paku Alam from 1888 to 98, around 90%, and almost half of the land permit is issued in the current Sultan. If we divided the land permit based on the purpose, on the government, they are 300, around 30%, but the government is actually for the military barrack, police barrack, schools, government building, everything in Jogja. Commercial is to build malls, to build ruko or kiosks, and then for social, it's like building roads, building bridges. So basically, if you go to Yogyakarta, all of the government's buildings are built on the Sultan's land. I still found out how the impact of the economic aspect of the transfer of the land. So this is the case, the success case. The second one, I divided into 4. I forgot in the beginning that I divided. This is the partial success case, Ternate aristocracy in North Maluku. So we can see there is a variation of success and failure, but from this chart we can see that only Sultan Mudaffar Shah, so the one that I put across, is compete in the election but lost. So we can see that only Sultan Mudaffar Shah is always winning in all elections since 2004. His queen, Nita Budi Susanti, quite controversial, win in 2 elections but lost in another 2. All of the sons and daughters lost in most of the elections. I found out that this is the characteristic type of the coastal aristocracy. The Sultan of Ternate doesn't have the absolute power, which are consequences of the control over land. So I found that this is partial success because he cannot control his land like in Jogja. So in Sultan of Ternate, there is no crown prince. So Sultan of Ternate is similar to any other coastal aristocracies in Indonesia. The Sultan is chosen from from the representation of the village under its control. So the Sultan cannot choose the successor, but the in Ternate we call it Bubato 18 or 18 representation of the village and areas choose the Sultan. So the Sultan's success, it's lost its economic basis from that since 1949. Shift from coastal, this is the most important one. It can shift from coastal to inland aristocracy. Even though they don't have the land structural system because they are coastal, but the Sultan used the adat, which is not part of the basic agrarian law. So basically, Sultan doesn't have land, and then the land is controlled by the adat communities, but the adat communities is controlled by the Sultan. So there is two steps of controlling the land. Adat land, mostly non-arable land, is not subject to 1960 basic agrarian reform. Economic and political structure based on land. Adat translate into political success for Sultan, but not necessarily for his family members. Why? Because the family member doesn't have control of land. It's only Sultan can control what is the land used for. The third case study. This is also the partial success, the aristocracy of Ubud, which is saved by tourism. This is the numbers of the legislative members this is the Bali from 1982, and this is for the Ph.D. Gianyar since 1992 to 2014. We can see, even though there is a decline, the blue one is the aristocrats, the red one is the commoners, and the green one, the green one is the non-Balinese, which is easily can be divided based on their name. If their name is Sutejo, it must be non-Balinese. So we can see there is the rising trend of the non-aristocrat to control the legislative. But even though the numbers of aristocracy declining, it's still important. This is the Bali region mayor from 1965 to 2015, and we can see from the graph that there is a rising of the commoners in Bali and the declining of the aristocracy, but still in the last 15 years there has been a stable numbers of aristocracy in control of Balinese regions. However, if we see the Gianyar, this is my case, the Gianyar is very, very unique because all of the regions since 1945 to 2017 are always dominated by the aristocrat, except this period from 1964 to 1969 during the revolutionary period of 1965. So basically, the Gianyar region is always controlled by aristocrat. The Ubud Puri is one of the dozens Puri in Bali, previously part of the Gianyar. Puri means palace in this regard. In Bali, Puri means palace. It's lost its economic control of land in 1960s, not only because of the basic agrarian law, but because of also the honor of the limitation of land. It saves some of the land from Bal through affiliation with adat communities or Banjar, similar to Ternate. So the ownership of the land is not controlled by Sultan or the head of the Puri, but diffused to the adat communities. And adat communities has independent culturally and also economically to the Puri. It's now become the richest Puri in Bali, benefited from tourism industry since 1970. This is, for instance, one of the hotel. This is the only Gianyar or Ubud is the only cultural tourism in Bali. You can find other beaches in Bali, but you cannot find this kind of clivery scenery of the Balinese classic view that many people like. So adat, so the Puri of Ubud adat support Banjar financially and culturally, which then translate into political support in 2008. Puri Ubud transformed the appanage of land-based system into tourism and then created the cultural-based tourism. Puri Ubud has led tourism industry in Ubud since 1920s, and one of the brothers is now head of the PHRI, or the Balinese Hotel and Restaurant Businessmen Women Association. This is the most powerful organization in Bali. He initiated the cultural tourism and put the Puri Ubud as the center, not only as the culture, but also initiated the homestay. While controlling the district, the representative of Puri Ubud, which before the region of Gianyar, failed to get nominated in the vice governor in 2013 due to fragmentation of Balinese aristocrats. So this is the view, for instance, of one of the hotels, the Royal Pitama Hotel, owned. This is the hotel network. They have a lot of the hotel like this, but because of financial limitation, I cannot have a first experience to this hotel. However, if we see the gross domestic product in Gianyar, we can see that almost half of the domestic product in Gianyar from services and also trade, hotel and restaurant is largely dependent on the tourism industry. And this is largely because of Puri Ubud. The fourth one, the Goa, a failed aristocracy. In Goa, this is the king of Goa, one of the king of the Goa, is the son of the previous king of Goa who transferred the Sultanate to the Republic. We can see that he has the fluctuated performance in the election. The green one is his votes in local direct election for the executive position, while the red one is for legislative position. We can see that he has the significant support for the local region, but not for the legislative at the national level, mainly because of he's seen as the only persons who can compete to the Limpo dynasty, one of the strongest dynasty in Indonesian politics today. The kingdom abolished in 1950s, including the Adat communities. So unlike Ternate, even though it's also significantly received an effect of basic agrarian law, but in Ternate, the Adat is still maintain their culture and their structure. But in Goa, it's basically gone. The Galarang, or the 9 Galarang, so the king of Goa is chosen by the 9 Galarangs in South Sulawesi, which is basically gone. There is no more institutionalization. There is no escape strategies and adaptation. It's not only lost palace land, but also non-palace land. So now the palace of the most powerful aristocracy in eastern Indonesia is become the museum. Partially resurrected in 2007, and he tried to reclaim 1,072 hectares he believed to be him. So I'm still working out based on the result of the court about this reclaiming. Land, he has economic capital for election. So I believe that my findings shows that he financed his campaign and his electoral performance based on selling his land. He lost in all elections since 1999, but he's still influential in Goa politics because of the strong family network in Goa. His last stamp will be December this year. This is the last one, the last case study, one of the most funny one. This is I call only gave the limited personal benefit of the Sultanate. This is very unimportant in election, not only in election but also in the politics of Palembang. I analyzed all of the newspapers in Palembang in the last 2 years, and none of these two guys appear in the front page. They appear in the inside of the pages, but because of they pay for it. So basically, the Dutch, it is true. The Dutch destroyed the Sultanate in 1925. This is what Gary Van Klinken defined as the total reinvention. So it's the total new, nothing related with the previous Sultanate. In 1825, after a series of political scandal and internal conflict between Sultan Mahmud Badaruddin II, Sultan Ahmad Najamuddin, his brother, the Dutch, and the British. The SMB2, Mahmud Badaruddin, and his family exiled and died in Ternate. This is his grave. And other aristocrats received salaries to the Dutch, some resistant until 1890s. But most importantly, completely lost its palace and non-palace land in 1890s. Now, the palace, the Kuta Besar, is the military barrack in Palembang. The SMB2, the SMB2 is become the national hero in 1984, and this is the grave in Ternate. And I asked the sultans, the son of Sultan Ternate, and found out that this is actually the fake grave because it's found using the metaphysical things. There is a rivalry between Prabudiraja on the left and Sultan Iskandar on the right. I will start by Prabudiraja, the police pensioner who one of the claimants of the throne of the, so-called the Sultanate of Palembang, and he has more justifiable hereditary line and hold important regalia. Importantly, he find a title market for Dato in Malaysia, so he sell title, and it's not cheap. It is 10,000 for this one, basic red. And then he can upgrade into gold and premium. So he manipulating the Sultan's title for his own economic benefit. This is the so-called crown prince, a highly educated crown prince, have a master degree, now a notaris, and he's running the business. This is the website, you can see. This is not in, even this website is not in Bahasa Indonesia, it's in Malaysia. So you can download the borang, the form from here if you want to become one of the Dato for 10,000 Australian dollars. Wow. The second one, another claimant, Sultan Iskandar Mahmud Badaruddin. This is the 10,000 rupiah money. Do you know what is funny about this? The funny about this is that this is not his actual picture. This is the imaginary of the creator of this picture in the Kick Andy show. So basically, there is no picture of the Sultan Mahmud Badaruddin, and there is a competition for drawing. And these guys try to make it as similar as it can to copy everything as his what I call imaginary hero. So he's in the pursuing of vanity. And you know, all of his, you can see his website, he's trying to have a local and national networking. The famous become a sultan, become a famous in return for business security. So this is with SBY, the previous president. This is the Jokowi, this is his favorite picture because it seems Jokowi to be asking something for him. But this is, I just taken 2 weeks ago. What's funny about this one is that this is during the Independence Day dinner in Palembang, and he's using the Sultanate clothes outside the palace. I never saw the Sultan of Jogja using the formal Sultan clothes outside his palace. So basically, he wants to be with someone and push photos everywhere. This guy, I follow him for a few days, and then at that time my hard disk was connected with his computers, and this is the ethic is coming in. So actually I can copy all of the data that he gave in my hard disk, but I didn't do that because of the ethic. I should do that. However, his vanity is basically for business security in return for economical benefit. His organizational man, obsessed with popularity, failed in 2004 election for national parliament when he ran for Pioneer Party. He sponsored National Festival Keraton in 2007 out of his own pocket. But he is most important because he can build network with elite to protect his business interests and shield himself from legal prosecution. This one, for instance, I tracked this company, PT Kelantan Sakti Utama, and found out that there is an illegal business in diesel distribution in South Sumatra. And this is also, I found, this is the government car, parked in his car for a lot of this. And then I asked that this is the facility of the government. How come? Because he's not the civil servant. So when the red, it means that all of the operational cost is goes to the government. So, in conclusion, the political performance of aristocrats is to like extent determined by the extent to which they were able to defend or revitalize their economic resources basis, especially land. Coastal aristocracy had a lower success rate than inland aristocracy, unless they transformed into land-based aristocracy. Aristocracy with high level of institutionalization, especially if it related to land management, have recorded high level of political and economic success. Land, which after 1965 was a much overlooked category in explaining political outcome, has proven to be a decisive factor in sustaining the role of the aristocracy in post-1998 politics. While not as dominant as in the Philippines, aristocracy-based land deserves a fresh look in terms of its relevance in social and economic capital. So I plan to have this kind of thesis structure, basically based on the cases. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, floor is open. Questions, comments? Yes, Tamara.
Thanks, Bayu. That was a really interesting presentation, and yeah, you got a really interesting kind of correlation and hypothesis. I just have a really basic question. How do they use land to gain electoral success? Yeah, did I miss something? I didn't feel that you explained that.
Basically, it's different every cases, but basically, the land is transformed into the material benefits, and then when it's needed, it can transform into political support. So the land is become the most important economic basis for this aristocrat to run for the elections. I would like to give you an example of Yogyakarta, for instance, the most success case in my 5 case studies. So in Yogyakarta, 100,000 of people living in the top of the Sultan's land, and this is actually the true defenders of the during the formation during the discussion of the law, which is the economic success of Yogyakarta. We can see that the Sultan is automatically become the governor. So, and it is on law. So his success, not because he participated in election, his success even he did not to participate, just sitting in his own desk, and then he become the governor. So this is the defenders of the sultans. So basically, they give loyalty to the sultans. In Ternate, for instance, the sultan didn't own land. So sultan does not own lands. But any dispute relating to land which is owned by the local communities or adat have to be consulted with the sultanates. So this is how the authority come into the place. So sultan doesn't own lands, but he controls the usage of the land. And in the local community, this is very important because this is their basic economic source for their survival, and in return, they transfer it into political support for the sultan in the election. So that's how it goes, basically.
Okay, Maeve.
You showed one picture of a princess or a sultan's wife or someone who failed.
Yes.
Now, I just wondered, are there any successes among the women, or everything you had in your presentation suggests that it was the men who won and the men who stood? Is that, even though you mentioned queens and you mentioned them, but is that still the case that the women don't have any chance of getting in?
So basically, there is a variation of women participation in politics, but Yogyakarta queen, the Ratu Hemas, has always successful in the election since 2004. She is now the deputy of the Senate in the national politics. So she plans to be quit in the next election, but she always recorded the political success in Yogyakarta. In Ternate, there is a variation of the Quinita, but actually her loss is basically, in my opinion, because of the internal conflict between him and the other children. So basically, there is also the rate of success of women in my research.
And last week he gave a presentation on the plan of the Sultan to appoint his daughter as his successor, basically.
Yes.
So it does play a role. And one thing you probably should say about the Sultan of Ternate is that he's now dead, right?
Yes, he's now dead.
And there's no successor at this point, right? There hasn't
Yes.
been an election and so on.
Yes.
So that was missing. Tony.
Thanks very much. That's fascinating. But I guess I'm not quite convinced about your basic argument. I mean, the first argument that you threw out, and I'm glad you threw it out, was obviously based on Jogja and didn't make much sense anywhere else. I'm wondering if this is really the same. I mean, if the agrarian law still holds, then everybody except the Sultan of Jogja is monstrously in breach of the law in owning lots of land. And I mean, that needs a bit of explanation. Is it that nobody cares about the agrarian law anymore, it's flagrantly flouted, or that in reality it's only in Jogja that the Sultan really controls the land, that elsewhere it's really a position of Kepala Adat, that the Rajas are exploiting it, and that they, as in Ternate, as I think in the South Sulawesi cases, and in the Malay cases I know better in North Sumatra, they're trying to position themselves as head of a sort of ethnic group or traditional community, so that they will have a role in the way the Adat is administered, and if land is about Adat, that gives them power. That would seem to me to be a different thing from what I think your point seems to be, that these guys have become Philippine-style landlords in total violation of the agrarian law. But maybe you can clarify.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tony, for your inputs. So basically, after I found this argument, I tried to test it to many other aristocrats. One of the most important tests is in Cirebon. So basically, Cirebon is not subject to Baal because Kasepuan Cirebon Sultanate doesn't have the agreement with the Dutch after the British leaving Indonesia. So he win in all of the law in the court against the government of Cirebon, and he was winning in Senate in 2004. So I think, and he's become still influential in the politics of Cirebon. So I think I will reconsider it about the community of Adat. But one of the hardest thing about my research is that the higher variety of the sultanates in Indonesia. I didn't mention here that there is an article about the Rajas, the village level who call themselves as Raja. So this is not part of my research, like what we found in the southern part of Maluku, for instance. So there is a lot of small aristocracies. Well, it's in the village level. So I just focus on the highest, the big one. Yeah, but I will consider your input. Thank you,
Stephen.
Yes, I'm really just pursuing a very similar question here, because I'm asking myself, what are you actually saying is instrumental about the control over the land when it comes to winning elections? I'm not quite sure what your argument is. In the case of Jogja, it's clearly not control of the land, it's the constitutional legal framework that makes him governor. So outside that particular case, what is it about the ownership of the land, which is, or control of the land, which you're arguing is instrumental in elections? Is it because it gives you a resource base to finance campaigns, or what is the how? How does control of the land allow you to win elections?
Yeah, actually, if we see from the surface that why Jogja can guarantee the position of governor, it's very easy to say that because the law said it. So that's all. But I try to look deeper. Who is the supporter of this law? Who is the supporter of the law? And I found that most of the supporter of this law is actually they are dependent economically to the Sultan because they live on the Sultan's land. So this is how the loyalty is coming to the action. So it's not necessarily economic benefit. I'm sure there is an economic benefit from transferring 600 agent governor or 600 governor permit to commercial purposes. For instance, in Yogyakarta, the biggest mall in Yogyakarta, Amplas, I forgot the name, Ambarukmo Plaza, for instance, and Ambarukmo Royal Hotel is built on the top of the Sultan's land, and there is a revenue of it. So, however, the number, I'm still working on the number of money, but one of the most important aspects of transferring the control over land is basically on the loyalty. In the loyalty is much more important rather than economic benefit, which I also found in Ternate. So they are not transferring. So the Sultan didn't receive economic, well, at least not much economic benefit from controlling the land. That's why he still become popular. But he received the loyalty from the people who manage and who work on his land.
Can I just jump in?
Yeah.
In Dr. Carter, there's a whole group of people who work for the Sultan, right?
Yes, I know. And then?
They have jobs for life.
Yes.
Guaranteed. Yes. So, what's to say that that's not why they support him?
So basically,
it's not the land, it's the.
So the Sultan, there's an institution. The Sultan is the one who work in the Sultanate is around 3,000 people, but they are not working at a regular basis. So they are just working twice in a month. So this is what we call as abdi dalam, or the Sultan's servant. But he control in Yogyakarta. He control around 10% of all of the population. And now the certification is in the process, but because of the law, the new law said that the Sultanate can own the land. So that's why there is no currently there is a certification process of registering which one is Sultan's land, which one is not. So basically, he not only control the land that is already many people living on it, but also the land that is now become the government building, the police barracks, and all of those things. So on all of the business areas in Malioboro Street, for instance, the most important street in Yogyakarta, all of them are built in the top of the Sultan's land, most of them. So basically, he has economic in Yogyakarta. It's quite important that he not only receive the loyalty from the people who live and who work and who depend economically on the Sultan's land, but also there is an economic benefit of it. That's why he can pay the salary and he can manage of the palace.
So you're focusing on the post-Soeharto.
Yes.
So I'm all interested how does previous eras like Dutch era, the Sukarno and Soeharto era affected the aristocracy performance today. So I'm asking how was the treatment of the government to those aristocrats in those regimes, and how does it affect it? Are you also going to consider that in your research?
Well, maybe not that much. Maybe just a few historical background. But basically, the government of Sukarno, in the time during the revolution, 1945 to 1950s, he came himself to every important sultanate in Yogyakarta and asked their support. Some of them give support, like Jogja and Solo, but some of them not, like Ternate and the late, for instance, in Pontianak. So basically, after 1960s, the government tried to just erase all of the aristocracy. There is no support given to all of this aristocracy. So the law on Yogyakarta is very important because it's now become the benchmark of the successful aristocracy, and all of the aristocracy now wants to have a law like the Jogja, which is very hard to achieve, of course.
More questions?
Thanks, Bayu. Maybe just a few questions then. One is, just to follow up on Tony's point, I mean, that seems to be quite an important critique, that maybe what's going on in most of these medium cases, in fact, well, it's about land, but it's really, but insofar as it relates to their position as Kepala Adat, so it's really the survival of Adat schemes affecting land ownership that might be the key. I wonder if you could just maybe reflect on that a bit. I mean, obviously that's the case in Ternate. Are there other cases around you can think of where that would work? The two other points, maybe just briefly. One is just, I'm still not entirely sure what you classify as the successful, the partially successful and the unsuccessful cases. I think it's just well, obviously Jogja's successful because, you know, automatically the governor and all of that, right? And then the partially successful cases are, they've won some elections but lost some.
Yes.
And then unsuccessful, they haven't won any elections.
Yes.
Right, okay. All right, okay. Maybe just a little comment there. Yeah, would be, maybe we shouldn't exaggerate the significance of the DPD elections, the so-called Senate elections, because that's not a powerful body, and it's not a body where the really serious electoral contests take place. That it's often, it's not surprising that people with royal sort of backgrounds win those elections, because it's often people with some sort of cultural capital but no real political influence or power who do win those elections. You know, people with religious backgrounds, or you know, backgrounds in the entertainment industry, or you know, spouses of important people, because it's not that important a body. So maybe that's just something that occurred to me. The other thing is just reflecting on your final case there with this character who's modelled himself on the 10,000 rupiah note. I mean, how do you... Because there's a lot of bogus, fake, as you put it, fake claimants to various thrones, right? Or there are real... and the case I'm thinking of is this Pangeran, this Prince of Banjar in South Kalimantan, right? Who is a Bupati, actually. So, Bupati. So, in your schema, he would actually be a very successful case because he became the head of a district and won a Pilkada. But it seems to me there's something very suspect about his claim to be the descendant of the Sultan of Banjar, that it's something he actually invented as part of his election campaign, and then, like this character, designed all these so-called traditional flags and festivals and outfits, and it all seems very bogus. So how do you deal with that sort of an issue?
Yeah. First of all, I try to answer that the first one about the sultans and Kepala Adat. I think there's a comment. I will put it as a comment, but I think this is come to my definition of success, partial success, failure, and limited personal benefit. I'm still working on the correct word of limited personal benefit. But what I found so far is that, for instance, those Kepala Adat in Ternate, they are very loyal to the Sultan. Even in the case, I delete the picture because this is too much. When the Sultan walk, they are knees in the ground. So I cannot find this kind of loyalty like this even in Jogja. So one of the occasion I test this is the Panglima Law, or the chief of the naval, so-called.
So I try to, mock the Sultan a little bit, and he's very angry during my interview. And he said to me, "Bisa tak bunuh lo, I can kill you." That's what he said. So he's very loyal to the Sultan, and he can do everything for the Sultan. And this is not only a story. In 1999 and 2000, there are hundreds of this kind of people died during the conflict in Maluku Utara. So they are supporter of the sultans. Died. There is a Chris Wilson's books about the From Soil to God. So basically, there are a conflict between the Sultanates people and the Muslim people, and hundreds of them died. And this is a very, very interesting story. So in this regard, I'm not only putting the Sultanate as I'm not only this way in Ternate, I put the Sultan in the top of the Adat, because that's what I found in the field. So the Adat community, they're very loyal to the Sultan, and they are the escape strategy for the Sultan to transform the coastal aristocracy into the inland aristocracy. So, well, my data says that, but I will consider about your input. The second one about DPD. In my fieldwork, I found that DPD is actually very important for the aristocrat, because they are seen themselves as the defender of everybody. So they don't want to go to the political parties, most of them, because in DPD they are seen to be defender of all of the parties, all of the factions of the society. Well, they become part of the political parties. They think that I'm just supporting this kind of party. So actually, in my opinion, DPD is very important, because when the aristocrats represent themselves in DPD, they are representing that they are the protector, or the protector of everybody, regardless of party affiliation, religion, ethnicity, or so on. So I think I still put the DPD as an important point. The third one about the success case of, for instance, in Banja. Well, I cannot answer that, because this is not my case. What is most important about this is that the story in each case is very, very different, and very, very, very localized. So there is some sultanates in the Banjar. I would not categorize them as the success, but I categorize them as one of the claimants, and it's 100 of them. So from the messenger to become the sultan, you can see how the message. So I interview one of the so-called the claimants, and he was a messenger and then become the sultan. So basically, there is a degree of variation between aristocracy basis that I cannot only easily put them as my case study. It's similar to the Palembang cases, which I consider that as a claimant. So basically, in the national Kraton organization, there are certain categories for who to become the aristocrat. First, they have to be the direct descendants of the previous sultan. They have the palace. They have the important regalia. They have the society that support them, and they have the annual events. So this is the 5 categories that I put into consideration to consider whether this is the claimant or the real sultan.
Just to help you out a little bit here, your last chapter is actually
it's talking about this,
right? So you start the case studies, and then the last chapter is about these clowns, who meet in these annual meetings and so on, where all of these people are coming with their regalia, like you said, the one who was fake and so on. So they're a little bit outside of those case studies, and as you say, there are hundreds of them. And in your case, I think I looked at this in 2005 as well, the South Kalimantan elections. There were, I think, 2 or 3 who suddenly used a nobility sort of title to their name. Nobody knew where it was coming from, but clearly it wasn't associated to an existing aristocratic history there. They suddenly, they said, I'm somehow a descendant of this family, but there was no actual palace, there was no title, there was no hereditary line to the last sultan, and so on and so on. But I think there will be the study of the claimants without a larger political context in the last chapter. Yes, Liam.
Yeah, thanks, Bayu. It just seems to me, kind of repeating what some other people have said, but it seems to me that this is a really interesting story about how you can find a loophole in the agrarian law to have yourself kind of declared kepala adat or something like that. So you have one or two sort of case studies where it's a successful kind of reclaiming of all these ancestral lands. I mean, how recent, I don't know how the Tanah Adat process works, but how recently have some of these decisions been made? I mean, how do you go about having the government declare you kepala adat and therefore entitled to control of all these lands? So is this something that dates back to the 60s or the 50s, or has it been within Post-authoritarian Indonesia that people have put their hands up and said, oh, by the way, I'm ahead of this ethnic group or community?
Yeah, thank you, Liam. One of the most important conflict studies in post-1998 Indonesia is the conflict on land. So, as I said, this is the second, many authors say this is the second most important regulation after constitution. So if you remember, in 1998, in 1999, there's a lot of claimings, one-sided claimings of the peasants to the planted tomatoes in the golf course. So basically, they are taking all of the land that previously was taken by Suharto. In 1999, there is a ministerial decree on forestry who define what is the adat communities. So there should be some there should be some community that has long genealogical ancestor living in this particular. They can prove that they have been living there for like hundreds of years, and they are bonded as a community. So there's a verification for the government to show that this is to categorize this is the adat community based on the ministerial decree. But basically, there's still up to now the conflict of land is become the majority of the conflict in Indonesia. Well, we can see in the next Indonesian update in the next 2 weeks it's about land, and I think one or two speakers will talk about the conflict because of adat and because this is a very important since post-Suharto Indonesia.
I think the question was more if indeed, and you have very concrete case studies for this, so Ternate and Ubud, if indeed former sultans, who previously were through their position as sultan in control of land but lost that land through the 1960 law, they found a loophole through the Adat regulations in that law to maintain their power over land. And the question is, how do they get into that position of the head of Adat in those areas? And I think the answer, I mean, maybe you would want to answer that, but in your two cases, in the past, I mean, before 1960, both in Ternate and in Ubud, the position of Sultan and the head of Adat was largely identical, right? Yes. So the 1960 law took the land away that was directly under the Sultan, but left the Sultans in the position of the head of Adat, right? Yes, and that's how they then come back and control the land through their position as Adat head. But as we've heard from Tony and others and Tamara, your challenge is really to show how exactly that happens, right? That exchange between, and this is so for Ternate, I've seen that material. So he has similar material to Jogja, where the Sultan is signing degrees. You can use that land, you can use that land for farming, you can use that land for commercial purposes. What then happens is an exchange of loyalty. Right? You don't actually pay the Sultan, although I've told him he also needs to look into that possibility, of course. I'm sure there's money flowing as well. But in the most cases, what happens is an exchange of loyalty, which then shows in large-scale support by these added communities during electoral campaigns. So that's your big task. And again, I've seen some of the material, and I think he can do that, but there needs to be more, a sharper focus on exactly that exchange of land, or control over land, into either economic benefits that then translate into capital for electoral campaigns, or loyalty that basically mobilizes voters directly in support of the Sultan. And in both cases, I think he can do it for Ternate and Ubud, and the Jogja case is a very, very, very clear one. Just to remind you, however, as well, and you have to talk about is also more, it's not only about the governor, right? There's a lot more elections happening in Yogyakarta for the mayor, in all of the Kabupaten, and you have to. Your point has always been that the candidate endorsed by the Sultan or negatively disendorsed, that's a decisive factor in those elections. So you have to tie that as well,
Yes.
to your focus on land. More questions? Yes, Tony, please.
That is all very helpful. But on the fundamental question that you started with, I suspect that's not the question that's going to make you famous and successful and universally cited, but rather one of two questions that lie behind it. I mean, the issue of what constitutes success and who won and who is a little bit finicky and not that exciting, I think. But behind it are two questions which are very important and exciting. I mean, the one that I thought you were sort of starting out with was how does aristocracy or birth still matter in a country like Indonesia, or indeed is it making a sort of unexpected comeback after the revolution, as we saw in Thailand and some other places, even Cambodia. And is it still got what Geertz called the capacity to make inequality enchant through a certain, colourful, spectacular something, as we all love, Princess, whatever her name is, in England and so forth. I mean, and you see it, of course, in Bali, and that's what Geertz was writing about when he said this, the capacity of the Rajas to orchestrate beautiful events and somehow people go along with it. But I think you're actually saying, I mean, that sort of interests me and it would interest a lot of people, but I think what you're really saying probably is not that's the underlying question, but the thing you're really onto is land, and that you're going to say land matters, and all those guys like Hal Crouch who said it didn't are wrong, or at least either that they were wrong in the first place or that it's come back, and that now there is a landed elite in Indonesia which is powerful. But I mean that would also be extremely significant, and everybody would pay a lot of attention if you could nail that. But I'm just wondering, can you nail it? Unless there's some way to measure, to actually show that people own a lot of land, whether or not they're aristocrats. Is there any? I mean, is that going to be possible, or is that you have to really edge around that awkward absence of data?
Well, yeah, of course this is very hard because I'm, challenging all of the established scholars. But that's what I found in the field. This is post-fieldwork seminar. That's what I found in the field. But basically, in the first question, apart from Jogja, I don't think that the birth or the aristocracy will be treated like those in the Philippines or in Malaysia. In the Thailand or in Malaysia. But in Jogja, this is still very important. So, and I think their importance is only limited to the provincial level, and which is in this case is Jogja. That's why it's become the special province. So basically, I don't think it cannot going to the national level. And the second one about land, well, I think I consider it's a comment, but I think, it's still very hard. I'm still working on it. I still have 1.5 years, but I think I have all of the proof from all of the interviews, the materials there. We can download from the National Court website about this land, and well, at least in Jogja, Ternate, and Gianyar, and Ubud, I can prove that the land is very important in transfer for royalty and economic support for the election as a material basis. Yeah, you can read my chapter later on.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not only sort of cute and funny. He has a very important point, and that is that he wants to see more evidence, right?
Yes.
And I think I agree with that. Tamara would agree with that. We need to see more smoking guns,
Yes.
right? So where your electoral success is tied to that exchange of loyalty, or where land leads to so much economic benefit that it then translates into an advantage at the ballot box. That's what you still need to show, right? We haven't seen it really today, so you should take this very seriously and come up with these very clearly compelling links of evidence. Yeah?
Yes.
I mean, there won't be a final sort of compellingly overwhelming smoking gun, but I think there is evidence there that can tie these things better together than we have it at this stage. Yeah. Yes, Ed?
Just two further comments, adding on, following from what Tony said. I think what Tony's given you is actually quite a good hint, because you can say, actually, in response to both of the things that Tony said, you can say, it seems to me what you're arguing is that no, it's not about the aristocracy's power to enchant and all that Geertzian theatre state stuff. It's about land,
Yes.
right? So that you actually have quite a good response and a good argument in relationships. Maybe it won't stun the world of Southeast Asian studies, but it's still a good, solid response in relation to that. On the Harold Crouch, the relative insignificance of land to the elite formation in modern Indonesia and so on, I think all you've got here is an exception to the general rule. You can't use these very narrow cases of a number of aristocrats to argue that, to suggest that land is really important to elite formation generally. All you can say is that, at least in these sorts of cases where these conditions apply, we have an interesting exception to the general rule.
It was written in
Yeah,
1972.
And we're still talking about it.
82, 92, 2002, 2012, and nearly 50 years.
Final
I
comment?
just
Tamara?
had a small empirical question just to follow up on what Ed's just said. How much land is controlled by these Adat communities, and of that land, how much is controlled by a sultan, by an aristocrat?
Okay. I will go to this map. More concrete. Sorry, this one. So in Ternate, this is actually not quite correct. The Tidore is here, the half of the province. So the Ternate Sultanate is here. He control half of the Halmahera Island. This is the Halmahera Island. So basically, he has power around these kabupatens, or there are 3 regencies that he can control, the adat in these 3 regencies. But in Yogyakarta, well, as I said before, he control 100% of the Sultanate's land, which is now have the legal justification. But he also have a say in the land not owned by him, especially in this case of the Chinese origin descent. So basically, it's limited. It's limited only to a province maximum in Yogyakarta, constituted of 5 regencies, but in Ternate is three regencies. In Ubud is only one sub-districts. So basically it's different. One or two sub-districts. So basically it's different, the level of control over the adat in each area, and it's also important for their political participation. So it's varied differently in each of the cases.
But most adat land doesn't have an aristocrat or a sultan.
No, not most of them.
Huge amount of adat.
Yeah, there's hundreds of them. So it's just only in the case that I look at.
Very briefly, we need to vacate this room because there's a class quickly after this. So very briefly.
I'm just thinking that whether you can allow more rooms to incorporate other factors apart from land as a kind of capital that the aristocrats had used to maintain their power, so that you can accommodate other kind of factors as well. And in the case of Thailand, is kind of different from Indonesia. You are talking about the provincial level, but in Thailand it's a more national level.
Yeah.
And there are many factors that help to maintain the power of these unelected, in your case it's elected, but the traditional elites, like the links with the military, the control of the links with the judiciary, but it's kind of different context. But I'm just thinking that if you can accommodate other factors, that might be useful as well.
So basically I try to control all of the 7 factors. This is the 7 factors that I try to find an answer about their political achievement. So, but from this kind of factors, from palace land control, institutionalization, state recognition, state budget support, economic success, and internal conflict, I found that the most compelling one is the control over non-palace land. So basically I try, there is no connection between the military and the judiciary. I cannot find it because this is very few, very small compared to those monarchy in Thailand. But I try these 7 categories to control it.
Okay, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking